Hello, everyone, and welcome back to World of Warplanes. But before we get started, I would like to go over one quick thing. A couple of you guys have mentioned that the microphone that I use in these recordings is pretty bad, and the volume itself is quite low. It's very difficult to hear. I am with you guys 100% on that. However, this microphone just simply won't go any higher. After a bunch of research and fiddling around with it, I think I found two settings that may potentially increase the volume, but for the most part, all of the normal settings are as high as they can possibly go. So I'm not entirely sure what I can do to increase the volume any further. So my suggestion is just, either turn up the volume on your phone if you're watching it on your phone, or if you're on the computer, perhaps you should plug in headphones because it's a lot easier to increase the volume. Uh, I usually don't have an issue listening to it on my devices. I just have to turn up the volume a bit, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. Sorry, that's about all I can do. This is as loud as it can get unless I get new headphones. And honestly, I don't really want to right now because these generally do the job just fine. Yes, they're terrible, but I'm not going to go out and buy new headphones. So, with that out of the way, let us get started. So, I'm going to be doing a review on a plane that I don't currently own actually. And it might be a little bit different. I did a similar thing with the pancake. Um, uh, before I left the game, that was the last video I did. Someone sent in a replay of the pancake before it got nerfed, and so yeah, I did a review on the pancake without owning it. I have the pancake now, but this plane that I'm going to be reviewing is one of those few non-premium planes that I currently don't own. So we're going to take a look at the Tier 10 American Heavy Fighter, the XF-90. But before we kind of start with that, here's my progress on the American tech tree. So as you can see, the Pirate I do not have unlocked yet, but the Pirate is the only Tier 9 plane, non-premium plane, that I do not have researched at Tier 9 or lower. So once I have the Pirate research, I will have every single non-premium plane in the game researched from Tier 9 and lower. The problem is now I need to save up about 20 million credits to buy the rest of the Tier 9s that I currently don't have. So kind of on a side note, I have to research the Pirate, and then I need to buy the Pirate, the F2H, the Starfire, the F84B, the IL-40 because it took forever to get through the IL-20. You just don't make much experience with attack aircraft. And then for UK, I have the Seahawk. Other than that, I have every single Tier 9 researched and purchased below that. So anyway, the XF-90 is one of those few planes that I don't have researched yet. But we're going to be taking a review and a look at this plane. So before we get started with the stats, let's first go over the history of the aircraft. So according to Wargaming, this Tier 10 American heavy fighter was designed as an air defense penetration fighter. It first flew in June of 1949, but it never entered service. So I did some research of my own and got a little bit more detailed. So yes, this plane is just a prototype fighter, but the prototypes were built and they did fly. So let us start off. The original name of this plane was the XP-90, the P standing for pursuit and the X standing for experimental. It was initially going to be after World War II in 1945, the Air Force wanted a new plane that had good airspeed and had good range. They wanted it to be able to stay up at high altitude and stay with bombers and escort them over a long, long distance. So they sent out that requirement or the new specifications for a new plane that they wanted, and Lockheed came back with the XP-90, not the XF-90, the XP-90. Um, but in 1948, the designation from XP went to XF, and the F standing for fighter. So it was designated as a fighter at this point. It was a very heavy fighter, that's why it's in the heavy fighter tech tree, but it was designated as a fighter nonetheless, because it was going to be a fighter escort for bombers. So the official name kind of turned into the XF-90 in 1948. So, once Lockheed submitted their proposal, they got the go-ahead to produce 2 prototype aircraft. The first one being the XP-9, or sorry, it's the XF-90, but XP-90, same thing. XP, XF, both of them are the same plane. So they built 2 of them. The first one being the XP-90, the second prototype being labeled the XP-90A. And that was just to designate the 2 different prototypes. Each were built slightly differently, but they were both designed for the same purpose, to test the potential of the plane. The goal of this plane, well, I already mentioned it, but Lockheed told the U.S. Air Force that this plane should be able to break the sound barrier, a feat that really hadn't been achieved at that point. There was attempts to, and I think it had already been done, but there really wasn't much information about it, and they didn't really know how it affected airframes. So, that's what it was tested for. And because they didn't really know the impact that breaking the sound barrier would have on aircraft, this plane was built like a tank because they didn't want it to get destroyed. They wanted it to break the sound barrier. So they tried to build it to withstand incredible amounts of force because they just didn't know how much force it would be able to take or how much force was required to be able to break the sound barrier. So they actually used a special aluminum alloy that hadn't really been used before that was 4 times stronger than normal. So much stronger aluminum alloy, and it was built to withstand up to 12 G's of force. Pretty crazy. And as a result, this plane was heavy, very, very, very heavy. And although it had 2 jet engines with the potential of using afterburner, they just didn't have quite enough thrust to get a massive plane like this moving very well. So in order to get it to move and break the sound barrier, it actually couldn't do it at level flight. It actually had to do it in a slight dive. But when it was doing a slight dive, because of the way the plane was designed, it could withstand the forces, and because it was aerodynamic and stuff, it was able to get up to those sound barrier speeds. So, throughout the testing of the 2 prototypes, the XF-90 exceeded Mach 1, or, Mach is a representation of the sound. Once you reach Mach 1, you are going the speed of sound. So this plane exceeded the speed of sound, according to sources, roughly 15 times throughout the testing. And throughout the testing, there were no structural damage. So this plane did succeed in its goal of not of being able to withstand the forces of going through past the speed barrier. So that's cool. But after the tests were completed, Lockheed was not chosen to continue the project, although they got pretty good information from the testing of the XF-90. It was not the chosen plane to carry forward, but the things learned from this XF-90 lived on in future projects, and they improved upon the XF-90's concept in later projects. The first prototype did not have a very good history beyond that. After the tests were completed, it was simply used as a test bed for weapon systems. So it was kind of destroyed in testing. And the second one was used to test the effects of nuclear warheads on aircraft. So again, the second prototype, the XF-90A, was subject to a total of 3 nuclear blasts and was left out in the desert. So that did not really have a very good ending either. So the XF-90 has a pretty tragic history. It had good purpose. It was used well, gave some good information, but came to a tragic end. However, there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. It was not all forgotten. In the in the late 1980s, the second prototype was decontaminated from the nuclear radiation and was brought to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force near Dayton, Ohio. However, there is going to be no restoration project planned. This plane will simply live on in the condition it is in after being subjugated to nuclear blasts. So it will be on display, but in a wrecked condition. Now, if this plane were to go into production, there were types of armament that was planned, and it was planned to have 6 20 millimeter machine guns, or it could also have a couple of different heavy machine guns that it could mount instead. Um, but the version we have in game is the 620 cals. Additionally, you could have as an optional bonus, you could either have 8 2.5-inch HVAR rockets, which are actually half the size of the HVAR rockets you get on the Banshee, the F2H Banshee. The F2H Banshee gets 8 5-inch HVAR rockets, so the XF-90 actually couldn't carry those big of rockets, or it could carry up to 2,000 pounds of bombs. And this version that we have in game can only carry 2 500-pound bombs. So again, we could actually have had 2 1,000-pound bombs on the XF-90, or we could have had up to 4 500-pound bombs. But alas, the version we have in game only has 2 500-pound bombs. Additionally, you could also have had fuel tanks on the tips of the wings, which, if you look up pictures of the prototypes, that's the way they had them. But that is the history of the plane. I now kind of want to go over the stats of the aircraft. So I don't have it in game. In game, I can't really pop up the stats from the game, but I pulled them from the World of Warplanes website to determine the base stats in comparison to everything else. Okay, so if we take a look at this chart that I created, if you want to know the history of these charts, how to decipher them. They should be pretty self-explanatory to decipher, but I have a couple of videos in the past that kind of goes over it. But here we're going to use the charts. There's only 3 Tier 10 heavy fighters, so it's pretty easy to compare. But let's start with the maneuverability. The XF-90 out of the Javelin and the 262 HG3 is the lowest, and it's not really even slightly comparable to the to the Javelin or the 262 HG3. It just isn't maneuverable, and that's something you have to keep in mind. But where it lacks maneuverability, you can see that it greatly recovers some of that from the airspeed. And the XF-90 actually is quite substantially faster than both the Javelin and the HG3, and that is really cool. That makes the XF-90 the fastest plane in the game. So very fast. It has an airspeed rating of 97. But with specialization and crew skills, you can get that up to as high as like 118. And um, you have to take into account the way that I took these stats were with the bombs equipped. If you take the bombs off, you will actually have a perfect 100 airspeed rating. So do keep that in mind. But even with the bombs, you are the fastest plane in the game. So you take that into account. I don't really think putting bombs on is a detriment to the plane because you're still the fastest there is. You know, you don't really need to be any faster. And if you want to become more faster, you can just use specialization and still keep the bombs and be just fine. If you do want to take them off, you will get that little bit of extra airspeed though, and you'll be able to outrun any heavy fighter a little bit easier, even other human XF-90s if they're not specialized. So do keep that in mind. The firepower, however, is where this thing lacks. And I say that loosely because yes, you don't have the 430 mil machine or cannons that the HG3 has, or you don't have, I don't know what the Javelin has, but it has some pretty big guns too. I think it has 430s as well. So the Javelin has a lot of firepower as well. So no, you don't get that, but you do get 620s. And because you get 620s, these are actually really, really good 20s. Most American planes, even at high tier, only wield 50 cal machine guns. Um, and you know, a lot of people say the 50 cal machine guns are a bit lackluster, and I tend to agree with that. They are fairly weak, but they have good sustained damage, and you kind of retain that sustained damage with the XF-90, but you have better range and you have better damage per shot. So these 20 mils are just better, straight up better than the machine guns. Basically, you can kind of think about it as you take the sustained damage from the machine guns, but you increase the damage potential of the guns, and you get 6 of them. So it's like super ultra powered machine guns if you think about it that way, and they're just very good guns. So no, you don't have as much firepower, but your shots fire faster. They fire not longer range, but they shoot out faster. There's not as much delay between each shot, which allows you to be able to pepper your targets a lot easier and find that lining. Where the 262 and the Javelin can sometimes struggle in that department, the XF-90 does not. It'll be able to hit your shots a lot more reliably. So do keep that in mind. It's very important. Now, if we move on to the altitude performance, it is actually, if we take a look, the altitude performance is perfect. It's got a perfect rating of 100, which is the same as the Javelin. Believe it or not, this is something I did not realize, but the HG3 has the worst altitude performance out of all the Tier 10 heavies. Like, what? I think maybe part of that, maybe part of that is the HG3 has more horsepower in its engine, it has more thrust capabilities, but the altitude performance itself is not as high. So that's why, although it doesn't have as high of altitude performance as the Javelin, I think you can get up to altitude easier in the HG3 than you can in the Javelin. However, the XF-90 has both altitude performance and airspeed, so it effectively feels like it has the highest altitude performance because you can keep your airspeed at a higher amount for longer and get to a higher altitude performance. So, yes, the service ceiling is technically the same as the Javelins, but overall, the XF-90 feels like it has a higher altitude performance than any other plane in the game. So, the altitude performance is nothing to scoff at. And lastly is survivability. The survivability is tied to the 262 HG3. However, that's just because the Javelin is an absolute tank. It absolutely tanks the amount of hit points. It feels more like an attack aircraft almost in the amount of damage that the Javelin can take. So no, you're not going to be having as much survivability as the Javelin, but you still have a very respectable amount of hit points, and you have more than multi-rolls and fighters. So it's still not terrible, but for heavy fighter standards, you are at the lower end of the spectrum. And then again, there is only 2 other planes to compare it to currently in the game, so you do have to keep that in mind. But yeah, that is about it when it comes to the stats of the XF-90. Next, I think we're going to take a look at the equipment that you might want to put on your XF-90. And I was looking at it, and I have this XF-15C, which is a Tier 8 American fighter, but it has the same equipment layout as the XF-90. So I'm going to use this in order to tell you guys what equipment I would put on there. Granted, this is not from personal experience, but I know how the XF-90 is supposed to be played. I know how it feels. I've fought it many times. I've seen people do well in it, and I know what works and what doesn't work. Just from experience and playing other heavy fighters, I can give you a pretty good idea. I can get a pretty good idea of what you should put on and what you should not. So, anywho's, if we start with equipment, the first one, really, you get either crew. I'm pretty sure these should be the same as what you get on the XF-90. I can't know for sure because I don't personally have the XF-90, but I'm pretty sure it's all universal. So I'm going to treat it as though it's the same. I'm sorry if it's not quite the same, but that's just the way it is. I personally would go for the forward accurate or the firing accuracy because you do have 620s. They're not terribly inaccurate, but they are, a lot of guns. Just getting it to be a little bit more focused makes it just that little bit better. Um, you can do crew resistance to injuries, but it reduces your aircraft maneuverability. Not that you have much to begin with, but I really don't think it's that useful. And then increased visibility and detection and decreased range. Yeah, increased visibility and decreased range at which the aircraft is detected by enemy aircraft. This, I personally would not put it on my plane, but there's merit if you do. And the reason I would say that is because you're so fast, this plane excels if you can ambush your opponents. So, what I mean by that is if you can sneak up on your opponents and they don't know you're there, then you have an advantage because they're going to be not trying to escape you shooting at them until you've already got them in their sights. By the time they realize you're there, it'd be too late. So doing that could be useful, and then also increasing the view range effectively of your plane allows you to find those targets and line up your shots at an earlier distance. Granted, if your allies are already spotting them, then that's one thing. But if you're going into a contested zone where there really isn't any allies, it could be beneficial to have this navigational radio equipment. So it is personal preference at the end of the day, but personally, I would go with firing accuracy. If we move on to the next one, we have increased HP. Not really that useful. I would put that more on heavy fighters or GA. Then we have wings and tails resistance to critical damage. Again, I really don't think that's that useful. Um, eh. Aircraft maneuverability. Okay, so the last two I'd say is kind of a toss up. It depends on how you want to play. Personally, I would go with increased airspeed. You already have the best in the game, but I would just increase it more. You could increase your maneuverability, and that would allow you to get your shots on target a little bit more, but you sacrifice some of your hit points, but at least you're not sacrificing your speed with that. So the one I would definitely not go with is the reinforced skin because it reduces your airspeed. I want to keep that airspeed high, so I would not recommend putting the reinforced skin on regardless, and I really don't think there's a whole lot of reason to put the reinforced airframe. This one, if you're struggling, if you want to have just a little bit more time where you can get onto target a little bit easier, you're not going to be out turning anything by any stretch of the imagination. But it might give you that little bit of ability to keep your guns on target or get your guns on target just a little bit easier. So if you're struggling with that and want that little bit of extra oomph, I'd say lightweight wing frame is a good option. Personally, I would go with polished skin though. Increases your airspeed just a little bit more. It allows you to get onto the tails of bombers and a little bit easier. I think the main reason you would want to do that is so you can keep up with any fighter just that little bit easier, but also to catch up to bombers because um, some of the tier 10 bombers go really, really, really fast if they are using their boost. So it just allows you to get your guns on target a little bit quicker. So I would personally go with that. But again, options up to you. We get two engine slots for the XF-90. So I would definitely go with engine thrust because airspeed, right? Um, and then the last two are kind of a toss-up. It depends on what you want. Personally, hmm, again, this one right here is going to reduce your aircraft speed, so I would not go for that actually. I think your two best options are increasing your maneuverability a little bit and increasing your engine thrust. It's up to you, but that's what I would go with. And the last one I think is kind of a no-brainer. This forward firing weapons slot is always the most valuable. I don't it's kind of a toss up, right? You have good range on your guns, but it's a lot shorter than, 30 millimeters, 45 millimeter guns. You're just not going to have quite that range. So it's not entirely a bad idea to do the range of fire. The long gun barrels isn't a bad option, but I don't think it's really that necessary. The other option is increasing burst length. If you're not sure, burst length is the amount of time you can fire for with the mouse held down before your guns overheat. Um, but I don't really think that's very useful. They're only 20 millimeter guns, right? So they're not going to overheat nearly as fast as they can on the 30 millimeters on the um, on the 262 or the Javelin. So you're already going to have better burst length than those planes. So personally, I would not go with burst length. I don't think it's really not that necessary. But the one I would go for is rate of fire. But the downside is you reduce your accuracy. I think it's an option I'd be willing to take because we already had put an equipment slot on that increased our accuracy, and if we go with Marksman 1, Marksman 2 on our pilot, it kind of counteracts it already, and it's not that bad. So having the rate of fire is good, especially because you're going to be traveling at such high speeds, you're not going to be on target for very long. The time that your guns are going to be on target is going to be very, very, very short. So being able to pump out that extra damage in a short amount of time is more beneficial in my opinion. So I would go gas operated action. Most times, 9 out of 10, I'm going to go gas operated action on any plane I fly. So just keep that in mind. That kind of comes down to personal preference, but it is what it is. Consumables, first aid kit, obviously, emergency control system. I really don't think there's much of anything else that you would want to put on there. For this one, you have to have the engine cooling. You absolutely must have the engine cooling on your plane. There is absolutely no question about that. You have to have engine cooling um, because it reduces the engine cooldown rate. Or, sorry, it increases the engine cooldown rate, which gives you more boost, is what it's essentially doing. Um, you have like 25 seconds base of boost on the XF-90. I believe, don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's about 25 seconds of boost. Um, but if you read the description of this consumable, it says it improves the engine cooldown rate by 5 times for 10 seconds. So here's my little nugget of advice for the day. Don't use this consumable as 10 seconds of extra boost. You are wasting the consumable on this particular plane by holding it down as 10 seconds of emergency boost. You can use it if like you need 10 seconds of boost, but it's much more beneficial to you is if you're low on boost, you're down to 10 seconds of boost, you're down to 5 seconds of boost, you're out of boost. Whatever the case may be, if you're low on boost, press it wait 10 seconds and you may receive something like 15 seconds or potentially even upwards of 20 seconds of boost. So you're doubling the amount that you gain by not pressing the boost key while this consumable is active, and you get more usefulness out of your consumable. Of course, if you need that boost to get away from somebody, go ahead. But it's better to have already used this consumable before you need to use your boost so that you have more boost to use to get away. See what I'm trying to say? You know, if you use this as 10 seconds of emergency boost, you will probably get away from your target. But if you use this beforehand and you had received like 15 seconds or 20 seconds of extra boost, then you would be able to use 20 seconds of boost to get away from your target. You know what I'm saying? You get more boost to work with if you let it work its magic. The second consumable slot, I would you could use bottle for manual engine restarter, especially since you have an equipment on that reduces the resilience to damage from your engines. So your engines will probably take damage fairly frequently. So, and of course, your speed is going to be the number one thing that keeps you safe and out of harm's way. So having an engine restarter is not a bad idea. However, I'd probably go with improved mixture control just because you get a little bit of extra thrust and cruise speed is increased just a little bit. I just think it's a little bit beneficial. You already have crazy airspeed. Let's just increase it a little bit more, make it more outrageous. And of course, universal ammunition, nothing crazy there. If you take a look at the pilot skills, let me throw some idiot into my thing. Let's see. What one do I not care about right now? Let's do a P-43. Okay. So I have a P-43 pilot. Um, you definitely want to go Marksman 1, Marksman 2. You just want to do Marksman 1, Marksman 2. You have 620s. They're not going to be ultra accurate. They're all in your nose, so they will be quite accurate, especially if you've already increased the accuracy with the equipment that I've told you to put on there. But Marksman 1, Marksman 2 is just beneficial. So go ahead and do that. However, if you are not having an issue with your aiming, see, here's the reason why Marksman 2 is so useful. You reduce dispersion of forward firing weapons by 5%, but the most important part is it increases the accuracy of firing at actively maneuvering targets by 10%. So it doesn't only make your shots more accurate, but if a plane is trying to avoid your shots in the first place, your shots become 10% more accurate. So, Marksman 2, beautiful, beautiful thing. It just makes your plane feel so much better. So, really, I would not substitute Marksman 1 and 2. I just think they're ultra, ultra useful. The next pilot skills I would go for is Engine Guru 2, and then also Cruise Flight because uh, it increases view range by 20%, but the main reason you would be doing it is it increases engine thrust and top speed by 3% if the aircraft does not receive damage for at least 20 seconds. So if you start firing your guns or if you are being shot at, that perk goes away, but it allows you to go from sector to sector a little bit easier. So those are the skills I would go for. To be completely fair, Engine Guru 2 isn't super useful. Cruise Flight is pretty useful, so Engine Guru 2 is not as useful as Marksman 2. So it's up to you if you want to use those extra 3 points. If you don't use them, I would definitely put them on Cruise Flight. And then even potentially something as simple as uh, Eagle Eyed. It's a one skill perk, but it increases the range at which enemy aircraft are detected by 10%, which allows you to get your guns on target and line them up quicker because you know where the targets are earlier. So anyway, that kind of wraps it up for the XF-90. I hope that was kind of useful. These reviews are getting longer and longer because after that specialization, there's a lot more options to do. Um, so unfortunately, they just they're going to have to be a little bit longer because I have to. They're, the options are not as set in stone as they were before. There's a lot more to play around with and really just make the plane the way you want to fly it. There's no right way to set it up, but there's a more ideal way to set it up than others. But that's why I'm going to spend a little bit more time on these reviews. I hope you guys don't mind. They do get a little bit lengthy, but I'm going to try to put time cards in the description because these reviews do get kind of lengthy. If you want to just see the replay, by all means, you can do that. If you want to hear the history, by all means, do that. If you want to know tips and tricks on setting up your plane, there's time cards down there. So, of course, do that. And with that being said, I would like to move on to the replay, which is actually a special replay sent in to Press 2 to win. He actually is a European flying pilot, and so yeah, I don't really recognize any of the player names, but let us go check out that replay. Alright, welcome guys to the replay sent in to us by Press 2 for skill, not Press 2 to win. Might as well be Press 2 to win. Obviously, that's a reference from World of Tanks, and how would he have known that unless he'd already had experience with World of Tanks? So maybe he re-rolled World of Tanks. I don't really know. Let's not worry about that too much. However, I'm going to turn off player name, and then I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, and let us begin. So we are starting out on the map Plateau. There's going to be a missile base in the middle, 2 command centers, and 2 garrisons. Let's actually look at the setup. We have a human Su-10 platooned or flighted up with an 1102B, which just came into the game. So those two are going to be sector flipping maniacs. However, he has an IL-40 of his own on his team, and he has a MiG-15 BIS DM on, actually just BIS, on the enemy team. So that's actually an altitude fighter, so this could be kind of an issue for Press 2 for skill, but we'll have to see if that's an issue. If we take a look, we can look at his equipment layout. By the way, he sent me a screenshot of his equipment layout. He is specialized, so if you would like to see his specific layout, I will have a screenshot of his layout at the end of this replay. But let's not get carried away here. He has set up his equipment. He's got, or his consumables. He's got first aid kit, control surface trim. Those two I said were mandatory. He put those on. Looks good. Then he's also got a pneumatic restarter and the engine cooling. Engine cooling I said was mandatory, so he has that on there. And the engine restarter, he went with that because he didn't want to lose his engines, which is a fair point. If you lose your engines in this plane, you are going to be in a serious trouble. He's going after this Su-10, but I want to just point out this right now. Su-10s have ridiculous tail gunners, and because they're only 20mm guns, they don't actually have that crazy of range, and so therefore he had to get quite close to the Su-10 in order to put serious damage on him. In the meantime, the Su-10 was hammering him with a tail gunner. So please do keep that in mind. You don't have the craziest range on these guns, and you're super fast, so it can be difficult at times to get your guns on target. He's going 720 miles per hour right now, so of course it's going to be tricky to get your guns on target. But he drastically lost speed even in a slight dive, so my guess is he was holding the brakes. That's something you have to get used to. In high airspeed planes, is holding down the brakes to keep your guns on target for that little bit extra time. It allows you to put more damage out. Notice the cooldown rate of the guns. It's not terrible, but it does take a bit. But yeah, you boost to gain speed. And then you hold the brakes to stay on your targets longer. You do have to be careful when you hold the brakes, though. You don't want to make yourself a target for somebody else. But do note, he's really not maneuvering that much, is he? He's coming in, he's nailing them, he's zipping out of the way, making sure he's safe, and then once he's safe, he can make a safe flip around. This plane looks really cool, by the way. It really is just an amazing plane. He's got a crap ton of kill markings on the front of his plane. Let's take a look. He's got like 6 kill markings in the front, either 5 or 6, but he definitely likes this plane, and yeah, it's obvious to see why. You know, it's got amazing airspeed, but it takes a while to get used to. Planes that are this fast, they're not for everyone. They take a little while to get used to. But if you do master it, it's very rewarding because it doesn't take you very long to get to the sectors that you need to be at. You can deal with human bombers and human GAs, unlike a lot of other planes. And because of that, yeah, you don't have as much maneuverability as light fighters, but you're more rewarded by the increased airspeed that you have. So that's something. One other thing I've noticed him doing is he's using his F command from the F keys on his keyboard. He's telling planes to attack sectors, to defend sectors, to attack certain players. You know, that's something that was added very recently, and you really, 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 really need to get used to being able to use that because it's a very powerful tool. If you know what each F key does, it really makes you a lot more influential in the battle. So, and also, I don't know why, but sometimes bots that you tell to do specific tasks seem to almost perform better sometimes. Like they're like, "Oh, this human told me told me to do this. This must be a very important task. I must not let them down." And so, I don't know. I've noticed that bots that you tell to do certain things can sometimes be more impactful than bots that just do their own thing. So do keep that in mind. It's a very powerful tool. One thing I haven't mentioned is he went to a missile base at the beginning of the game, and if you want to win, that's definitely something you want to go to because the missile base is hands down the most important sector in this entire battle. Command centers can be quite tricky to flip because there's so much AA firepower and there's a lot of air defense planes, and usually they're very highly contested. So command centers can be quite tricky to flip. So if you have a missile base that's able to flip those sectors for you at a safe distance, it's going to be a lot more powerful. This game is only about half done. He's got 18,000 personal points. This guy is on a rampage. Uh, this plane is very, very powerful in the hands of a skilled player like him. So anyway, they lost the missile base, but he didn't really care because this plane is so fast. It takes him like 10 seconds to get to a new sector. So he came over to this command center because he saw that his allies were doing some damage to it already, so he figured he might be able to flip it. So he came over. Things were looking pretty good for a while, but the enemy is gaining the upper hand. They have 4 sectors, so he needed to come over and flip the important sectors. Now they have both command centers. The garrisons really aren't that impactful. They're very easy to flip. So the only other sector that he needs is the missile base. So he's going to come over here. If he can flip the missile base, he's going to be in a much better spot. He'll have all the impactful, important sectors, I would say. But one other thing I wanted to mention that I noticed about his setup, he doesn't carry any bombs on this plane. If I was flying, I would put the bombs on because, you know, they're not super great bombs by any stretch of the imagination, but just having that little bit of ordnance to flip a sector that you might not otherwise be able to do is just useful. But he probably opted to have a little bit more airspeed, and that's not a bad idea. So you don't have to have the bombs by any means, and we're seeing that here. You don't need it. He just got the ace. He's got 22,000 personal points. It's ridiculous. Such a high scoring game. This is something ridiculous. But they still have 4 sectors, so if he wants to win this, he needs to either kill all planes, which if we're looking, that ain't happening anytime soon. No sirree. He needs to take the human players out of the game as soon as possible, because the longer that the human players are in the game, the less chance they're going to have of making a comeback. He also really wants to destroy the The human bomber and the GA, of course, obviously, but he needs to take out the bombers and GAs regardless because obviously the bombers and the GA are the ones that are doing the most work in flipping the sectors. So his main goal right now is to eliminate those, eliminate the heavy fighters because they're his biggest threat. And with that, he has taken the military base. But the enemy needs 100 points to win. He needs almost 300 points to win. So he needs to flip sectors now. And obviously, there's only 5 planes left on his team. They are making a comeback. Um, but there's no way he's going to squall all the planes by the end of the game. If he's going to win this, he has to take more sectors. There is no other option. That is the only way. But he also realizes that if he can hold this military base, if they lose the military base, it's over. So he kind of needs to hold this military base because the military base will do work for him at the same time. They've almost got 2 garrisons. They need to flip those 2 garrisons now or they're going to lose. The bomber's almost going to take out that both garrisons. He needs to find a way to destroy that command center. They have 4 planes left, so he could win this. No, and it's a loss. Oh no, I didn't realize that the first time I watched it. I didn't realize it was a loss. I was watching his skill. 29,500 personal points, and it was a loss. Oh, that feels bad. It feels bad. But I'll meet you back at the hangar, and we'll wrap things up. So actually, I'm not going to go back to the hangar, but I'm going to end this by posting that screenshot of his setup that he sent me on Discord. Um, so there's the setup that he has. Take a look at it. And this is a very impressive game. It really is. Getting 20,000 personal points, even getting Winged Legend at tier 10, can be quite a feat. But he almost got 30,000 personal points at tier 10. That's very, very uncommon. However, heavy fighters, they're flexible. They don't have maneuverability, so some people may say that they're not flexible. But because they have such high airspeed and usually really good guns, it doesn't take them long to kill targets, and they can get to where they need to be when they need to be there. And sometimes that's all you need to really make an impact. Unfortunately, this battle was a defeat, but I don't think he cares that much. If he got nearly 30,000 personal points, you can't argue with that score. That is a score, and I would say that's impressive, and it is. Don't get me wrong, but he sent me more than one screenshot of these battles. Also, as we're ending up, I will be cycling through the screenshots that he sent me of the post-battle results, so you guys can see them. But just realize this wasn't the only battle he had that was nearly 30,000 personal points in this plane. So, yes, he's an amazing pilot, like, very impressive. But I think that goes to show the power of this plane. It doesn't have the most survivability. It doesn't have the most firepower on paper. It doesn't have the most maneuverability, but it has really good altitude performance and it has top of the tier airspeed. Or not top of the tier, top of the game airspeed. And if you put those factors together, it really creates this recipe for a monster plane. So thank you so much to Press 2 for Skill for sending this in. Sorry, I almost forgot your name. Press 2 for Skill for sending this replay in. I hope he sends in more because if he can play other planes to the degree that he plays these, he's gonna make me look like the noob. Man, he is very knowledgeable about the game. But anyway, thank you for sending that in. Please leave comments down below. Tell him thank you in the comments. But because I don't have the XF-90, tell me if I got some things wrong or what you guys think of the XF-90. And now, as always, stay safe, and I will catch you next time.